Welcome back to You Must Be Woken, the podcast where we have honest and sometimes tough conversations on the topic of diversity and inclusion with her, Dawn Hurst.
And him, Craig Richards.
In today's episode, we're exploring the topic of well-being at work, what it means, why it matters, and how it can impact your teams and your culture. And we'll be asking the tough questions like, has workplace well-being been hijacked by desk massages and lunchtime yoga? Or does Flexi time and 4-day work weeks actually work? However, before we get started, should we catch up? How you been?
I've been really good. I've been doing lots of well-being things.
That's good. So, perfect timing for today's topic then.
Absolutely. Had a weekend in the sun, so all good. All good.
Nice. A dirty weekend or just a nice weekend?
No, sadly not a dirty weekend, just a weekend.
Fair enough.
What about you?
Yeah, I'm good. Busy as always. Jake's doing really well. Had a couple of little wobbles of him at high school the last couple of weeks, but he's getting back on track. He's all good. And I'm off to Ireland this weekend, so I'm looking forward to a jolly in the Emerald Isle, so all be good.
Will you find me an Irish husband when you're there?
I'll find myself one while I'm there. Luck of the Irish and all that, you never know.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Awesome. Should we get into it?
Let's do it.
Okay, so as always, we like to start off the episodes with a news article relating to the topic that we're talking about. So today's article comes from the financialtimesadvisor.com, which details how just over half of the firms in the financial services sector plan to significantly boost investment in health and well-being strategies this year. The research conducted in August in 2024 with 500 employees and 503 decision makers in employee health and well-being showed that 32% of firms are planning to invest a lot more towards this topic. In the highly competitive, fast-paced world of financial services, attracting and retaining top talent with comprehensive remuneration and benefits packages has long been a priority, but with relentless pressure and stress on employees, higher rates of sickness and sickness-related absence, these are creating significant challenges for HR teams. What do we think of that?
Interesting, isn't it? I think this whole topic of well-being is actually nothing new. It's just being rebadged and refocused is my view. But then again, I am the dinosaur at the table.
Well, it's not just your view, actually. So I've been doing some research on well-being recently because, I wanted to know, is workplace well-being a fad? And the short answer is no, it's not a fad. Well-being at work has been a thing as far back as the Industrial Revolution.
Absolutely.
And do you know what? It was a Welshman, a Welsh social reformer called Robert Marcus Owen, who was first to propose a 10-hour workday to help protect the well-being of the workforce. And by 1817, he then went on to a more aggressive measure for the 8-hour workday and coined the phrase 8 hours labour, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. There you go. Did you know that? And one of the first organisations in the world to adopt Owen's proposals was Ford, the motor company.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, in 1914. How fascinating is that?
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think that, we could learn an awful lot from that because even what you've just said in terms of an 8-hour working day.
Can't remember the last time I did an 8-hour work day. It'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it just? And to break up that 24 hours in that way, how fabulous would that be?
Yeah, can you imagine? That'd be really cool. I mean, I get to the end of the day and I haven't got any energy to do anything other than sit on my sofa and watch Netflix.
Yeah, and then when we come back to the basics of what do we mean by well-being, it's exactly that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And, we need to be really mindful of the real fundamental basics. If you're tired, you're not performing. If you're tired, you're not sleeping often. Yeah. And it becomes a massive vicious circle. 100%.
And I tried to do a bit of searching for what the actual definition is for workplace well-being. And it varies. I even went on websites like Acast, which is an employment type website in the UK. And even they had varying different descriptors of well-being. So I've come up with my own kind of version of that. And I guess what I've described it as the concept, because it is a concept, of the overall health and happiness of an employee at work, including their physical, mental, and emotional state. And notice how I put at work, because workplace well-being in particular, well-being goes far wider than that, to your point about home and home life and play and all of that good stuff. But actually, when we're talking about workplace well-being, I've come up with that it's the overall health and happiness of an employee at work, including their physical, mental, and emotional state.
I love that. And you could spider off that all of the individual elements, whether it be financial health, whether it be, healthy eating, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Because we often think about well-being or health and safety, don't we, about the environment or, somebody's physical state. But actually, well-being incorporates physical, emotional, and general health and well-being. I thought that's why I kind of put it there. And I guess the point that I wrote underneath my little thing when I was writing that out was it's a dynamic concept that means it can change over time and based on environment and experiences and what's going on for somebody. So just because somebody's well-being is good one moment, it can change, right? And so, if we're going to be thinking about our policies and our practices for a workplace, we've got to recognize that it's not a static thing. It's not one and done here, right?
And I think that can, there's several dimensions to that, isn't there? There's the immediate life changes that send us in a different path to that we've planned. But there's also those different elements of life that we work through and the different requirements of what we need. And I know certainly from my well-being, what I needed at 20 is very different to what I need today.
Yeah.
And if there was one set policy, that wouldn't work for me.
Yeah. And it's got to be much more fluid than that, right?
Yeah.
Because our workplaces are made up of multi-generations, as we've talked about previously. I guess the other thing I would say to employers here, and I do this a lot, is be careful when somebody's pitching to you what you need to implement from a well-being perspective, right? Because if I'm being really blunt here, they are lying to you.
Yes.
So be really careful that they're not telling you it's all about well-being champions, mental health first aiders, motivational workshops, gym passes, exercise classes, or funky breakout spaces and the latest tech gadgets and all of that. Because actually, what really makes a difference for workplace well-being is realistic workloads, safe environments, fair wages, capable leadership and management. Those are the things that mean or determine whether people are well at work.
And I think you make a great point. If we layer on top of that, of course, an equitable approach as well, in that what each individual person needs is often where companies stop because it's too complicated.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not. I remember in one of our businesses a few years ago, we introduced a wellbeing process and we allocated a budget per head.
Yeah.
And the way that budget was spent by each individual was entirely different. Some went down the traditional gym route or a PT. Others went to a crochet class or a walking club. And those things work for them. But also be mindful of those physical interventions, making sure that they're inclusive to everybody.
Yeah. We've seen, haven't we, in this space, organisations spend £250,000 on wellbeing initiatives.
Yeah.
And then they go, I don't really know whether it's made a difference or not. And we're like, oh my, stop, please stop, right?
Fresh Fruit Friday.
It's just because it is so expensive to buy these things. And actually, it starts with your leaders, right? And I hate to say this, because it's always starting with the leaders. Those middle managers, they are the squeezed middle in a work environment. And actually train them on how to spot whether somebody's under pressure or somebody's not coping very well, and train them to know what they can and can't do about it. So if Craig's done a 60-hour work this week, why don't you say to Craig, listen, thanks so much for all your hard work. Take Friday off, go and spend it with your family, right? Go and do that. That would have much more impact on Craig's workplace well-being than, whether he can go to yoga in the lunchtime or whatever, right?
Exactly that. And it is being mindful of that rest element of what you were talking about earlier. We can't underestimate the value of rest.
Yeah.
And, we always talk about crawling into a weekend, crawling into holidays. And the consequence of that is, when I go on holiday, it takes me 3 days to unwind. That is not healthy. That's not well-being.
Yeah.
And we've got to make sure we're not doing that for our teams.
Yeah. And it's also, for me, it's easy to get sucked in, right? When you enjoy what you do. I enjoy what I do. So I don't mind working 12, 13, 14-hour days, 7-day weeks, right? I don't. But often, as my colleague and partner in this organization, you will say to me, Craig, take a break. I have booked your time off. You're taking a break. Because even if I'm not concerned about my well-being, you do it for me, right? Because you're absolutely right. When I take that break and I take the time off, like you, it takes me a few days to recover. And then I really enjoy the 5 days that I've got left, right? And then I think, I don't want to go back. I'm enjoying it.
But then you're brilliant when you come back. And this is what we underestimate the power of rest. And, this comes back to your point about those basic fundamentals. We need an environment where we can comfortably say, I need the next 2 hours out because I can't function. And we look at that in a different way. And I know we're going to come on to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess just the other thing I want to talk about, and I feel really bad here because I've got a bias in this space, but I want to talk about mental health first aiders in the workplace because it's a tough conversation and we always talk about tough conversation. I'm not a fan. Right. And I just don't like them, not because the individuals, but because I don't like the thinking behind why they're there. Often it's badged as we give them a bit of training for a couple of days and then we make somebody a well-being champion or a mental health first aider. And we say, oh, they're there for signposting. Right. But actually, we all know that they don't behave that way. They all think of themselves as a part-time therapist. But actually, mental health practitioners have spent years crafting their practice. And to give someone a 2-day course in a room somewhere and call them a mental health first aider, I'm just not buying it. I just don't think it's healthy for an organization to have that in place. I'm just not a fan. And I can give you 10 reasons why, but I won't rant about it. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, though, because it's my bias.
I share the bias, to be entirely honest. I think, and I come from a position where my daughter is a professional psychology practitioner and has studied for 8 years to work within the NHS with the patients she does. And 48 hours of training does not compare with the professional triage system that we have in most countries. And I actually would go a stage further and say how dangerous I believe it to be. There are certainly anecdotal cases suggesting that triage support has been given incorrectly to individuals in the workplace and it's resulted in harm. And I also feel that by the very nature of people, we want to be perceived to be a greater expert in something than we actually are.
Yeah.
And therefore, when we get our little flag that says we're a mental health first aider, we struggle to go, that's as far as I go.
Yeah.
Dangerous.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I guess the other bit for me is it means that everybody else can just absolve themselves of the responsibility of looking out for people's well-being, because you can just go, oh, go and see Susie over there because she's the mental health first aider. Well, actually, no, Mr. Leader, you're the leader of the team and you should be monitoring the well-being of your workforce. And if you think somebody needs a break, then it's for you to give them the break. Or if you think somebody needs some intervention and support, you're the leader. You should be the one signposting them to either your EAP service or to a professional or whatever that looks like. And it always makes me feel like it's a way of absolving leaders of their responsibility in well-being. And I'm not a big fan of it for that reason as well.
I agree. And where do you stop? Are we going to have a physical health individual? Are we going to have a financial health? Are we going to, where does this stop in terms of trying to absolve responsibility?
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to dwell on mental health first aiders because I'm aware a lot of even our own clients have them, right? And so, you've got them in place, that's fine. You just need to make sure that they are signposting and not triaging and doing the things that they shouldn't be doing. Okay. What about flexi time then? So 4-day work weeks and all of that good stuff. Because, I think this is also a good opportunity for us to talk about some of that stuff as well. We've had a suggestion from some listeners as well to talk about this topic because there are often, some really interesting stats around the 4-day week. There was a big trial done here in the UK about a 4-day work week, and it was the largest global trial of its kind. It saw 61 UK-based organisations take part for 6 months. 89% of the companies in the trial have decided to continue with it. 100% of managers, 7 CEOs, said it had been really positive or very positive effect on their employees. 50% said turnover rates reduced as a result. And Microsoft Japan offices also trialed it and saw a whopping 40% increase in productivity.
Nice.
Wow. That's interesting stats, right?
But there's some other interesting things to layer on top of that, because I come back to this generational argument I always come back to. There's research that talks about the cognitive ability of somebody over 40 years of age in the workplace, and that they're at their peak for 4 days a week, and therefore can be far more productive in 4 days a week than insisting on a fifth.
Yeah.
And therefore, this makes complete sense to me. And it takes some management, because it also takes some change from the individuals, because whether they're consolidating 5 into 4 or whether they are adapting the way they work, it is very difficult for people to change that work pattern.
Ooh, see, this is interesting for me because this is how you apply it, right? And I have seen horror stories of the way people have applied not just 4-day weeks but flexi time, right? So in my mind, when they were talking about that trial, I had assumed that we'd moved to a 4-day week, which means the individual lost a day's pay and the organization were able to replace that time. Because the other thing that happens, right, with a 4-day week is we go, oh, Craig's gone down to 4 days, but he's still got to do his whole job in 4 days now, which creates increase on pressure for Craig to get it done in the 4 days, which makes it harder. And then the line manager doesn't get any more hours to go and spend on someone else to make up the day lost for Craig. So actually, is productivity going up because we haven't got a choice? Are we making financial savings as a result of it? Like there's lots of questions for how you manage that process. Not that I'm not a fan of flexi time, because I think it's important, right? And I think it's good. It's benefited me as a single parent having more flexible working. But I've seen some horror stories with this sort of stuff. I went into an organization once who were on their knees financially, right? And so they were going through a really difficult piece, and they'd called me in and said, can you help with the culture? Productivity's low, financially we're struggling, all of these things, we're finding really difficult. So the first thing I did was a time and motion study with them, right? Because I wanted to understand why productivity was so low. They were paying market rates of pay, so they weren't, they weren't like they were not paying very well and getting poor talent as a result of it. So we did a time and motion study. Inevitably, their problem was they had more work than they had hours available. When I looked at the deeper availability, it was down to flexi time, right? So 60% of their workforce was operating on condensed hours or flexible working patterns, 9-day fortnights, 4-day weeks, all of this kind of stuff. They had hardly anybody in the office on a Friday. Friday was like a ghost town, and so there was nobody there. Everybody's having a lovely long weekend. And then the organization wonders why they're struggling, right? Why financially they're not performing, their productivity was low. on further inspection of the condensed hours, nobody was actually monitoring productivity. So they'd agreed all of these flexi arrangements, but nobody was monitoring whether or not they were working for the business as well as the individual. It was just all about the business. When I then probed it further, a lot of the managers said to me, we haven't got a choice, have we? And I said, what do you mean you haven't got a choice? Why don't you have a choice? Well, when the law changed, we had to accept all flexible requests. No, you didn't.
No.
Well, when did that become a thing?
Yeah.
And it was a myth that was existing in their organization that every flexible working request just had to happen. So pretty much everybody was on these flexi workings.
Amazing.
It was just wonderful. But the organization is struggling and really, really struggling with it. And the approvals process just was non-existent. It just went through. And I was like, right, okay, we need to scrap this. We need to change this. This is making your business not a viable business because you can't operate this way. Your adjustments have just gone way too far the other way. Anyway, we corrected it. We've managed to work that through and we've sorted it. But I wondered to myself, how many organizations are going through exactly the same thing where they have too many staff on flexible working patterns. They don't have enough, therefore, working hours available to complete the tasks on hand because either they're saving the money or they are not spending it on resource.
Absolutely that. And, I think this is where these topics become oxymorons, aren't they? They just start to contradict each other. They're not embedding well-being. They're not embedding time. They're not embedding rest. They're just causing more stress.
Yeah. I agree. And I genuinely believe for organizations out there, a time and motion study is one of the most valuable things you can ever do. Yeah. One of the most valuable things you can ever do because, we see it quite a lot. I'll go into an organization and I'll go into one team and it's all great. There have been away days and they're all really motivated and it's all wonderful. And then I go in the team down there and they're all pulling their hair out because they're overworked, overstretched. And I think, how can two teams in the same building be so very, very different? And it's because we haven't done time and motion studies. We don't understand what this team is doing versus what this team is doing and whether or not the resource is imbalanced in an organization. Yeah. It's one of the most powerful tools you can have as a practitioner.
Massively.
Yeah. Okay. What else then on well-being? What else would you say is a big challenge for organizations to think about?
I think cost versus return is the big one in terms of making sure that the interventions are suitable for everybody. I see a lot of organisations who badge sporting events, for example, as a wellbeing activity and haven't considered the 25% of their workforce who can't contribute to
golf.
that. Yeah, absolutely. I've got a client at the moment who's doing a massive football tournament and that's great. But whether we like this or not, the majority of the females are not interested in taking part and playing in a football tournament. Yeah. So again, it's being mindful that we consider the equity at the same time that we're considering.
Although I'd be interested in going to their football tournament if they want to extend the invite. It's interesting. I've seen some stuff that works well, but again, we need to be mindful of keeping it really simple. And that's why I love where you started with the 8, the 8, the 8. Yeah. Well, it's true, and but that was born in the Industrial Revolution, right? It's not rocket science. We should just be doing that. Yeah, I guess the other thing for me and that I'm really keen for organisations to think about is before you spend the money on a wellbeing initiative, ask yourself: will it fix a symptom, or is it a root cause solution?
Yeah.
Because we spend an inordinate amount of money fixing symptoms of things, right? So we go, oh, that team are a bit stressed. Let's give them a well-being day, or let's
take them out to lunch.
Let's have a head massage for everybody. No. Let's ask ourselves whether or not they've got too much work on, or whether we're setting unrealistic expectations. Have their workloads increased for any particular reason? Is there something that we can do to remove systemic barriers to the way they're going about their work? Is there technology we can employ that would make their life better? Because that will have a much bigger impact on their well-being than giving them each a head massage, right?
I agree. And if you couple that with environment, because environment is massive, isn't it? We are very square around environment in which we work. We all sit behind the desk all day, and we very rarely, much as we talk about things like walk and talk or let's sit in the garden, or it doesn't matter where in the world you are so long as you're doing your work. That's not quite as widely acknowledged. And
do you know what I thought you were going to say just now? Is, let's get bean bags and stuff like that. And I was thinking, do one, for God's sake.
Hello, this is me.
But when you said environment, I thought you were going to go down that road of, let's get everybody some bean bags and stuff. So I'm
on about the power of things like green space. It's been a beautiful day today. Am I any less effective if I go and make this call from my garden?
Yeah,
exactly. We put our backgrounds on. We're equally as professional, and we should be relaxed about that. Yeah. If people work 4 days a week and they're 4 days a week from Mallorca, so long as they're doing their hours, does it really matter?
Yeah. Good. I'm glad you were talking about slides, right? Slides, the other one. The amount of workplaces that seem to have a slide
or a trampoline.
So one of the first questions I ask, right, is, you see, you've got a slide, and they go, yeah, we've got a slide. I'm like, when's the last time you used it? I haven't. Yeah. I've got a slide for then, because it's a feature, right? Because it makes us look like we're a cool organisation that takes wellbeing really seriously. Oh my, right? Seriously, like my 12-year-old might like it, but you don't have 12-year-olds in the office.
One of my clients has got a room full of football tables with the little ping pong, foosball, and you see the worst behaviour over this time out. We're in relaxed time. They're nearly killing each other. Fascinating.
Amazing. Okay, so let's do a bit of the so what then. So what should, we talk about wellbeing initiatives. People are spending a lot of money on this stuff, and obviously we would argue, not saying don't do any of it, but just make sure you're getting a decent return, or it's fixing the problem. So what are the basics we should ask organisations to think about?
So the first is to remember that one size doesn't fit all, and that it needs to be equitable. Everybody will have a different requirement, and therefore to offer a menu option or a budget-based option is much more appropriate. Don't forget the basics of your working hours, your time for rest, your time for sleep, making sure people are taking their annual leave, making sure people are taking some form of breaks throughout the day, and that they have a workload that is capable of being completed in the time. Any investment that is made is in good quality interventions rather than just tokenistic impacts. And think about environment and what you actually mean by flexible working and place of work, and can that also help people?
Yeah, I love that. I do my usual ask yourself some questions, right? So if somebody is coming to you as a leader and saying, hey, we need to invest 200 grand in whatever initiative or whatever process, I would be saying to yourself, okay, how will I know this is making an impact? Is it fixing a symptom, or is it a root cause solution that they're asking me to invest in? Because why fix a symptom when you could fix a root cause for exactly the same price? So if it's 200 grand, you could employ 4 more people, right? Yeah. Doing that kind of stuff to make life a bit easier. Much, much better to spend on that than on, a bit of well-being. So just make sure that you've done that. Then make sure you've got feedback mechanisms in place, right? So what is your whole organization telling you on this, right? Rather than a few individuals saying, we really need to spend this because Bob down the road has spent it, or because our rep has pitched us something, right? Ask your organization, right? So people are telling me we need a foosball table. Do we think we need one, right? And I'm being obtuse to make the point, but if you can't say categorically our whole organization is demanding this, then I'd be questioning who is demanding it, and ask the question about who does that. Then I would ask yourselves a couple of questions around your line managers, right? Because I have a lot of sympathy for line managers. I've said it before and I'll say it again. They are the squeezed middle in an organization. You've got top of the tree who goes, yeah, we're going to do this and this is direction. Come on, everybody. And then you have the bottom of the tree who's saying, we want this from our line managers. And then you have the line managers in the middle going, how on earth am I going to do all of these things all at once? And then we don't train them very well. So actually, let's train line managers to understand what is well-being at work in the first place, right? Let's train them to understand you have empowerment to take some action on some of this stuff. So if Craig has done a 60-hour week, you can give him Friday off and no one's going to bat an eyelid at that because we're training you as a line manager to be serious about your employees and your team's well-being. Let's train them on how to spot signs of stress or burnout before they happen. All of these things are going to be far more impactful root cause solutions as opposed to kind of symptomatic nice to haves and pink and fluffies. So just make sure that you are focusing really hard in on some of that stuff would be my advice around that.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Lots to think about.
Yeah. And look, I'm not saying you shouldn't have motivational workshops or employee assistance programs or, office yoga and all of that. If that's on top of and it's lovely, great. But if you haven't done the basics and you haven't put the scaffolding in place in the first place, then I'm sorry, mate, it's all just fluff.
Lovely.
Cool. Okay. So I think this is the point in the show where we're going to do some listeners' questions. This is where we hand over the mic to our listeners and we will answer your questions unscripted. And I think we have somebody bringing in a envelope for us to open. I think it's Spike this week, actually. We haven't seen Spike since episode 1. Thanks, mate. Okay. So we have some listeners' questions today. Let me have a look what we've got. So this is a WhatsApp question. Jean listening in from Canada. Hello, Jean. Lovely to have you. I work at a middle management layer, and I'm becoming more convinced that more and more people within the organization are quietly quitting. How can I support my leaders to understand what we need to make some changes and support my direct reports? What a great question.
Great question.
Should we explain what quiet quitting is first?
Yeah.
Go on then.
So quiet quitting is where we mentally slowly start to switch off from the job. We're slowly quitting and therefore our productivity level is marginally reducing over a period of time. We know that we work generally at about 54% of our capacity and capability, but it can drop dramatically.
Yeah, just going through the motions, those kind of things. Okay, love that. Okay, so what can Jean do to support the leaders of her organisation to understand they need to make some changes here and support people more?
So first of all, before Jean can help anybody, she needs to understand the issue in detail. So a piece of discovery work, some listening groups, some one-to-one interviews with the organisation, and to ask some direct questions. Are you likely to leave in the next 12 months? Are you working at your cognitive and physical capacity? Those kinds of questions that will build up a picture of what challenges individuals are having. Once she's got that information, it will be an opportunity to create a problem statement and to create some remedies from that problem statement and then present that to the leadership team, also demonstrating the impact, because we know, of course, if we've got people quietly quitting, the productivity is reducing, but people will get to a point of quietly quitting where they physically quit.
Yeah.
And we can also reduce attrition. So
yeah. And Jean, my best advice is purchase the ROI tool, right? The Metimer ROI tool, because that will give you the evidence that you need to demonstrate that actually the cost of doing nothing in this scenario far outweigh the cost of an intervention here. So whether that intervention be training or development or whether, whatever it might call for once you've done your discovery, the ROI tool will help you demonstrate to those leaders, actually there's a huge cost to doing nothing here, whether that's an attrition cost, sickness, absence, productivity, whatever that looks like. The ROI tool will give you the evidence that you need as well.
Undoubtedly.
So, great question, Jean. Thank you very much for that. We've got a question from TikTok. So I saw in a recent podcast that you were talking about representation and how it does matter. Do you think over-representation of minorities can be problematic? Oh, I love that question.
Oh, great question. So let's take a step back from the question for a moment in terms of if we are using an equitable and an inclusive process. It's based on meritocracy anyway. So overrepresentation actually shouldn't be such an issue. However, if we've taken a quota and target approach and we have actively created an overrepresentation, and that's not based on merit, it may well cause a problem.
Yeah.
So the classic is your favourite institution, the BBC.
Yeah.
Who, if we look at the country, we've got about 18% of the population who have a disability of some description. And in characterised drama within the BBC, they're running at a 40% representation, which has turned off a lot of the public in terms of the topic.
Because it's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
They don't buy into it.
Don't recognise.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said there. And I guess the other example I would give here is if you look at careers websites for organizations now, they always make me chuckle because they have, every characteristic visible on those careers pages now, right? So whether you're a person of color or you're LGBT or disability or whatever, right? There's lots of representation in pictures on careers websites because they want to be really inclusive and they want to show that they're really diverse organizations. And then people rock up and go, oh, this is not what the website looks like, exactly, right? The office.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I guess is the point there, right? If you're over-representing your workforce in the wrong way, the reality for people will be really different. And then immediately upon entering your workforce, they're thinking, oh, so it was a lie then.
Yeah.
This isn't a safe space for me. Or is it? I don't know. So you're almost kind of setting people up to fail from day one. So yes, I guess the answer is overrepresentation can be problematic if it's not managed in the right way.
Yeah, sure. Groupthink, all of those good things.
Absolutely. Love that. Oh, what a great question from TikTok as well. This one isn't a question. This is feedback. And this came through on LinkedIn from Faye. On the back of one of our previous episodes, we discussed the Netflix show Adolescence and women's safety, and Faye has left us a comment that I really feel is worth sharing. She said, I've had 2 scary experiences when working away from home for Tier 1 contractors in the past. Both times I spoke up about it, resulting in a change of policy and procedure. Many women I know don't speak up because we all fear being seen as difficult. But it's so important to do it anyway. You'll make things safer for other women. Organizations should always risk assess first. One common issue is booking hotels in policy, which may mean a long walk in the dark when spending just a little bit more money for a hotel outside of policy may actually save someone's life. I thought that was a really powerful comment from Faye. So this was on the back of the Adolescence we reviewed in a recent podcast, and we were talking about I think it was the quote we used at the end where men think people will laugh at them, women are scared people will kill them. And when we talked about setting up sites and things, and Faye's using the example there twice that she challenged the organization she was working in, and twice they responded, right? So what do you think about that one?
I think great they responded, and I think that tiny adjustment, I've seen so many safety breaches that could have been avoided for pennies.
Yeah.
And it's just a no-brainer for me.
Yeah. And most organizations will have like a public transport policy as well, where they'll say, oh, you have to catch a bus or a train or a tube or whatever, right? But if you're leaving the office late because you've worked late one night and it's dark and you're a bit nervous because you're out of town, get a bloody cab, right? And surely as your leader, they would say, yeah, just put the cab through. Don't worry about it, right? And there's got to be a reason for doing that, because it is really important that we recognize that stuff. And to Faye's point, challenge it, right? Challenge your organization on some of their policies, because for the sake of an extra tenner for a hotel that's out of policy, that's, closer, you save on the taxi fare, and you might save someone's life. So really good comment. Well, listen, thank you, Faye, for that feedback on the last previous episode. That was really, really helpful. Okay. Back to our recurring feature, woke or joke. So I need to say, before we start this one, because you're doing this woke or joke, this is the last time we're tracking the numbers. Okay. So drum roll. Do you know what the scores are?
I don't.
Well, I do.
Me.
I've got them written down.
Tell me.
Unfortunately, in the rear is me with 5 right.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
You're not at all. And you've scored a whopping 8. So depending on what happens with your one today, you could either be on 9 or I could be on 6. But either way, I have sadly lost this competition. So you have to choose where I'm taking you for dinner.
Well, lots of viewers wrote in, and we are going for dinner in Budapest, and we're going to the Four Seasons. So.
Very nice.
And you're paying.
Well, clearly I'm paying. So for those of you not aware, Dawn and I are working together next month in Budapest, which would be lovely. And so it sounds like I'm buying you dinner. Okay, but don't worry, Woke or Joke is not going anywhere. We're just not going to track the scores anymore because there's no point because I lose every week at the moment.
Please. I did offer that we always draw woke and joke.
Come on then, you give us the last scoring one. This is the last scoring Determine one. The final scores.
I love this one. Okay. So, the Great Plant Pronoun Protest.
The what? Plant pronoun?
The Great Plant Pronouns Protest.
Okay.
In 2024, the ultra-progressive city of San Francisco sparked global headlines when activists demanded that all municipal greenery be assigned they/them pronouns to honour plant sentiments. The Board of Supervisors, after a 3-hour Zoom meeting featuring a PowerPoint presentation titled Photosynthesis Feels Pain, narrowly voted to install tiny pronoun badges on the park trees.
Oh, God. I am... so it should absolutely be a joke, but it's San Francisco, so I'm going to say it's probably woke and it's probably true.
It is a joke, and it was totally created with the help of AI, and it came from DeepSeek. But yeah, I loved it.
I genuinely would not have put that past San Francisco community at all. There you go. There's me stereotyping San Francisco. Apologies.
Fabulous.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's it for another episode. So thank you very much for joining us for You Must Be Woking. Until next time, bye from me.
And bye from me.
Thank you for watching and listening. If you liked our discussions and our content, why not leave us a review? And so we can reach even more listeners. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe or the like buttons and the follow buttons on anywhere you get your podcasts from. You can also find us on all the social media platforms at You Must Be Woking, or just search hashtag YMB Woking, where you can continue the conversation and get involved in the chat after the show.